Hey friend, welcome to Milk and Honey with Lemon. The Bible says in Numbers 14:8, and if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. On this podcast, we talk about stepping into that overflow that God has for us by becoming those ultimate Proverbs 31 women. Hey, I'm Lemon. I am just like you, sister friend. I knew God had something more in store for me, but I couldn't see a way out of the laundry piles. And frankly, I resented that Proverbs 31 woman. How was I going to live up to the hype? That is until I found out how to really step into becoming this Proverbs 31 woman through leadership development. In this podcast, you're going to find financial freedom, leadership growth, and motivation so you'll be able to do all the things God has called you to do with ease and really step into that land of milk and honey. Happy New Year, friend, and welcome to Season 3 of the Milk and Honey podcast. I cannot believe it. We've been doing this almost a full year. In 2 weeks, it will be a full year that this podcast has been out. We're 85 episodes in. I think it's episode 85 already. I cannot believe it. We've published more than one episode a week this year, which is incredible. My goal this year is to produce 2 a week for you. Have a solo episode and a guest every single week for you, which would be very exciting. It's a big goal, but that is the goal for this year. And I wanted to really take a minute to let you get to know me. We've been doing this for a full year. It feels me pretty well. I know a lot of you reach out to me, which is so fun. I love that. But I wanted to take a minute to really tell you my story and tell you all of the nitty gritty, all of the things that make me Lemon. I grew up in New Jersey. It's so funny when I go back to New Jersey because people will tell me, because I've lived in the South for a long time, and we'll get to that part of the story. I've lived in the South so long that people up in New Jersey tell me I don't sound like I'm from New Jersey anymore. But then people in the South, they tell me that they can hear a little bit of the Northeast in my accent. And so I guess I'm a healthy mix of the two. And so I was born in New Jersey. My parents split when I was 10, and that was tumultuous. I'll say that. My mom had me very young. There was a lot of trauma associated with the divorce. The divorce was fine. And I know that's weird, but it was the things that were said to me and the responses to me that made it difficult. It was less about the fact that my parents split and more about the way that I was treated when they split. I think it was easy to unleash both of their feelings onto me. I'll say that. And that's how they dealt. They were young. My parents were younger than I am now when they split, and they had 2 kids. That's a lot. And anyway, I grew up with my mom, my sister, and we lived with my grandparents in New Jersey. And my grandparents were great. I lost both of my grandparents in the last 5 years, but my grandparents were absolutely incredible people because it's interesting. So my parents split at 10, and it was right at that time, like right before we moved into the house I spent the majority of my life in. We lived in this one house, and I remember being in the stairs because my bedroom was in the attic. So I lived in a very old, like 1700s house. And so my whole bedroom was the entire attic. I know that sounds terrible, but it wasn't. It was like ginormous, and I had the entire top floor to myself and my sister. So it was bomb diggity. So I remember being on the stairs in between the second floor and the first floor. And it was before my parents had split, actually. So I get this vision, and it had to be from God. So I was not raised in a Christian household, and I'm going to get to that in a minute too. But I get this vision from God. It had to have been God because I still remember it so vividly, that I was living in the South. I'd met my husband at church, and we were going to have 2 boys and a girl, and that's how our life was going to be. And I remember telling my family and them thinking I was absolutely insane for that because, like I said, I was raised in an anti-Christian household. And my grandparents, they had lost a child to SIDS in the 60s. Late 60s, early 70s. The church they belonged to was less than supportive. My grandmother called her clergy on a Friday night and said what had happened. And Her clergy said that he was playing poker and he would see her on Sunday. And so that was the end of organized religion for my grandparents. They were done. That was it. And I get that. That is some serious church hurt. That is a big wound that would be really difficult to overcome. That is a very difficult wound to overcome. And so my grandparents, they left organized religion. And I get that. And I don't blame them for that. And the way that translated to my mother is that like church is bad and Christians are stupid because God doesn't actually care about you and there is no God type of a thing. That's at least what was conveyed to me. And so when I have this vision at 10 of this is how my life is going to turn out, they all thought I was nuts because God doesn't care about you like that. That's what I was raised to believe. And I tuck that away for safekeeping. I go to college in the South, which is I loved my school. I did. I loved it. It was my dream school. I applied to one college and of course I got in and I loved it. I moved there sight unseen. And then I was sexually assaulted the night before classes started. And this school that I fell in love with, this dream school that I had, became another source of trauma. And my life really spiraled after that because here I was living in South Carolina. And the school I went to was a D1 AA school. And ESPN thought it would be really cool because the person who assaulted me was on the football team. And so ESPN thought it would be super, super cool if they reenacted what they thought happened to me on ESPN. And I had to move dorms. I was harassed by members of the football team. There were people walking around campus with my attacker's mugshot and things on it saying to free him. The comments on every news article was negative to say the least. I'll just say that. They were not kind. None of them were kind. I remember even the football coach going on ESPN because they interviewed him and him saying something about the fact that I was basically an outsider. And they didn't know how I was raised, but they knew that he was raised to be a good Christian. And so that they would just pray for me. And so there was an onslaught of attacks from people all over. And so I was living in a state where I didn't know anybody. The police had taken my cell phone because my attacker had actually apologized for it and texted me that and just begged me not to say anything to anybody. And so the police actually took my cell phone. So I had a police issued cell phone. I had a police escort to classes, police outside my dorm room because football players were coming and spray painting their jersey number on my door and telling me to call them for a good time next time. And even after I moved. And so they could have only figured out where I lived and everything if the football coach had told them. So it was not a great time. And my way of coping is I partied hard. I drank a fifth of Captain Morgan every single day for months. I blew all of my graduation money. I spent everything that I made working over the summer. Every dime I had. I spent it in the first semester just trying to numb what I had gone through. And because it was still ongoing, right? Like here I was a freshman in college and I was having to go meet with the prosecutor, or in South Carolina, they call them solicitors. So like I was having to go do that. I had to go to his bond hearing and things in hospital issued clothing and things. And it wrecked a solid 6 years of my life. I was an absolute mess. And I remember being angry at God about it because here I was, and I knew my attacker. I knew him really well. I was so naive. I was barely 18. I turned 18 in May, and here I was in August living at this school. So I'd been 18 for a whole 2 months. And I met this boy at orientation, and he was beautiful and everything that I thought I wanted. He was a Christian. And So I'm like, all right, God, I met this boy at school and he fits all of the things that you told me my husband would have when I was 10. So this must be the guy. And so we spent the whole summer talking and I knew him so well. He came to see me the day I moved down there. I was with him every single day. And then it took a turn. And so I was so angry at God. I'm like, God, like you are a liar. You don't care about me. You are not interested in me. That was false hope from you. And I was angry. And so I just drank and I will just say I had some loose morals back then because I just didn't feel like a person anymore. And flash forward to I am 24 years old now and I'm back in New Jersey and getting my master's degree and working at a school. And I was still a little reckless. I was still out drinking with my best friend every Thursday night. And then I would go to school on Friday and I would be out drinking until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and then be at school at 7 a.m. I was reckless. I was so reckless back then. It had just become the norm for me. And I remember my neighbor coming to my grandparents' house because that's where I was living. And my neighbor invited my grandmother to like a Bible study. And my grandmother said no. She's like, I have my own relationship with the Lord. I'm good. I don't need a church. And so she said, okay. And she looked at me and she said, do you want to come? And I said, probably not. Because now I'm like, I'm very in the world. I'm still angry at God for what has transpired in my life. I felt like all of these things were his fault. She gives me this invite and I'm like, I just really don't want to go. To be perfectly honest, I'm busy with graduate school. I'm working at a school. I was coaching gymnastics still and dance. And I'm like, I do not have time to go to your Bible study for an hour every week. I just don't. And she said, isn't that the great thing about being a neighbor is I know that you're home during that time. She said, and I'll feed you. And I was like, all right, now, yeah, I'm interested, I guess. Like now you've caught me. I don't really have an excuse. So I'll go. And my neighbors, they're still happily married. They're on a mission trip right now. They're beautiful people. And they are so insanely happy together. And I'm like, how are you guys so happy? I'm like, because here I am. Like my parents have been divorced now for 14 years, which again, it was a nightmare. I'm like, I've been through all of these like terrible things. So like, how are you guys still happily married? And she was like, it's the gospel. That's how. It's the gospel. And I said, okay. Like I'm in. If you're telling me this is what God can do for your life and your marriage, then like I'm in. That was all the testimony I needed to hear from somebody to be like, I'm in. I'm willing to give God a shot. Like I'm jumping all in. And so I jump all in full, I'm baptized within 3 weeks of that conversation. And I was like, okay, now what do I do? And so I went from, because I was like, I got to do this. And so I went from being at the bar every Thursday night to being at Bible study every Thursday. And I a full 180. I was a completely new person overnight. All the old habits and behaviors and things, I was like, gone, goodbye. I'm a new creation. That's what I'm going to do. The problem is I went full legalistic though. Everything, like there was no context to what I was reading. There was like nothing. None of that happened. So I went full legalistic, which I think happens to new Christians. You're like afraid of messing it up. You're afraid of doing the wrong thing. You're afraid of interpreting scripture wrong. So you go full legalistic in the beginning. And so with that, I still had all of my old friends and things. And so I remember during that time period, my best friend was moving out of her townhouse. And so I went to go help her move out of her townhouse. And one of her friends said, hey, why don't you come to Atlantic City with me tonight? It's birthday. And I won't say his name. So she was like, let's go to Atlantic City then. I'm like, all right, whatever. So we drive the 30 minutes back to my house. I get some clothes. We drive back up to her house to get ready. And then we drive the 20 minutes to Atlantic City. Great, no problem. We go to Atlantic City. My best friend and I, we still were, every time her and I got together during that time period, even though I'm like, I'm saved, I'm a new person, it was really easy to revert back to old drinking habits with her whenever we got together. And which is something I've learned. obviously in the last 10 years. And so her and I, we go to Atlantic City. I meet the person who I end up marrying 9 months later. So her and I, we go to Atlantic City. I meet this guy. It was his birthday. And then her and I, we went and did our own thing because we were like, I'm not interested in doing what you're doing. But then he asked for my number and we kept running into each other and we end up together. And I was like, all right, clearly I screwed up this meet a man in church, get married in the South thing. Like this, my life is in New Jersey now. And so him and I get married 9 months later. And I was 24. And this is when things I think got really bad. And this is a big turning point, I think, for me too, in how I feel about the way that I do things. So this is all going to come together in a nanosecond. My relationship with pharmaceuticals and everything. So my ex-husband, as shocker, we're not married. He had a military injury and it required a cadaver to solve the problem. And so while he was waiting for a cadaver, he was on painkillers. And I remember before we got married, I remember going to the doctor with him, this pain doctor. And he said to me that he was going to become dependent on the opioids he was prescribing. I didn't know anything about opioids. I was raised in a household where you just trust whatever a doctor tells you. That my mom worked for a doctor's office my whole life. And so all of her friends were pharmaceutical reps. And I had all of the experimental vaccines and my blood was drawn from my bedroom. And I got a flu shot in my kitchen. And if I was sick, I was hanging out with drug reps at a doctor's office in the back while they brought lunch. That was normal for me. And so I did all the experimental things. When I was in college, I ended up putting on 40 pounds like rapid fire, like within a month and a half. And a doctor said, oh, you have gallbladder. That's the problem. And just surgery removed my gallbladder. I had no issue with that. I was like, whatever, it's fine. I don't care. Because I trusted doctors with almost like a blind certainty. And so when this doctor tells me that my ex-husband's going to become dependent on these, I'm like, whatever, what's best? You're the doctor. So you must know what's best. What I didn't realize at 24 years old is what he was telling me is that my ex-husband would become an opioid addict. And that meant there would be angry outbursts during withdrawal. That meant our bank account would consistently be drained. It meant my mother-in-law at the time would enable this behavior. She would send him money to go buy drugs from drug dealers. And it got really bad really fast. And so I remember going to the church that I belonged to. And again, now remember, I'm still in legalistic land. I joined this church because I was told the gospel creates happy, healthy marriages. And mine wasn't. I was walking into church on a Sunday morning and my ex-husband was snorting painkillers off of the dashboard in the church parking lot. And he couldn't even get through a whole church service without having to go back and do more painkillers. Church was like an hour, y'all. And he couldn't get through it. And I was putting on this face and I was questioning like, God, where are you in this? And maybe I just need to be better. I need to do more. I need to tithe more. I need to be in my scriptures more. I need to be hosting people at the house more. I need to go out and help missionaries more. I need to do all of those things more because obviously I'm not getting it. And then we miscarried several times and it was awful. And I was angry. I'm like, God, where are you in this? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? And I was so angry at God and I kept turning to modern medicine, and modern medicine told me there is nothing wrong with you. You are perfectly healthy. And I was frustrated and I was angry, but I was like, okay, these doctors know what they're talking about. And clearly, I don't know what God is doing here, but okay, whatever, I guess there must be a purpose for this. I'm just not seeing it right now. And I was angry and I was frustrated and I was confused. But I still, because of the way I was raised, I'm like, all right, these doctors know what's right. And maybe this is just normal, what's happening with my ex-husband. And maybe it's me. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong here. And so I remember it got to a point where it was so bad. I remember it was so bad. Our rent had gone up significantly. So we'd moved to Pennsylvania to be closer to his family, which is like an hour and 15-minute drive from where we both grew up in New Jersey. So like we didn't move far. And so I remember our rent had just gone up and up over the last 3 years. And I'm like, hey, there's a special. We can get a bigger apartment in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and it's cheaper. And they're waiving the first month's rent. All you have to do is pay the security deposit. This is perfect. I just put my Christmas bonus in our checking account. Like we should be fine. I should be able to go write a check right now or swipe a debit card or whatever this second. And I remember my ex-husband saying to me, there's nothing in our checking account. And he told me that he had spent everything on painkillers again. And I was so frustrated. I had just had rotator cuff surgery a few months before that. I tore my rotator cuff coaching gymnastics. And again, I immediately was like, that's fine. We can have surgery. I don't care. I didn't do painkillers because I saw what they had done to somebody, but I was like, yeah, that's fine. Whatever. And I remember my ex-husband, and I had my surgery in Philadelphia. He drove me home from Philadelphia, left me home, and then drove back to Philadelphia to go buy painkillers off of somebody. And so I was home alone for 2 hours while he went to Philly to go buy drugs. And the day I had surgery, and it was super frustrating, right? Like I couldn't use the whole right side of my body. I'm like, great, thank you so much. And so I remember this had just come to a boiling point for me. I was so frustrated. How could you spend everything we had again on opioids? How could you do this to us? And I was so angry. And so I remember we were hosting a Friendsgiving. My friend and I, she lived next door in the townhouse next door to me. And so we were like, we're going to host, what do we call it? We called it like Friendsmas or something because it was in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we were like, we're going to host Friendsmas or whatever. What do we call it? I forget what we call it. Yeah, we called it something weird. Anyway, so we have this party and I had been up cleaning for 2 days. We hosted it at her townhouse. So I'd been cleaning for 2 days, but didn't have really time to eat. And at this point, I'm like pulling away from God a little bit because I'm frustrated now. I'm like, I'm angry. I'm 27. I feel like my life is crumbling. And it's been on a steady crumble since I was 18 years old. So like here I am for 9 years. I feel like my life has been on a steady decline. And it's like, God, where were you in this? And so I was pulling away and I get to Friendsgiving, whatever we were calling it, whatever this party was. And again, so I had been cooking all day, but didn't actually eat anything because I wanted to make sure there was enough food. And I was so busy. And then I'm getting ready and doing all the things. And I remember having 1 or 2 glasses of wine. And then somehow I ended up, and I didn't drink liquor. I didn't do any of those things. And I was blackout drunk by 7 o'clock at night. The party started at 4. Blackout drunk, 7 o'clock at night. My ex-husband did not bother to show up to the party, which was next door to where we lived, until after 7 o'clock at night because he had been out buying opioids again. And I was so angry. I was so angry when he walked in. This is not my finest moment, but he walked into the party, acted like everything was fine, and I started laughing. I was like, I am done with this marriage. I'm done with the whole thing. I want nothing to do with you. Like this was embarrassing. This was so embarrassing. And I eventually go home. I slept on the couch because I didn't want to sleep in our bed. And I remember waking up the next morning. He went and got me Chinese food and was trying to be nice. And then he says to me, he goes, did you mean the things you said last night? And I'm like, that is the only thing I remember from last night. And yeah, I meant it. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. This is not the life that God promised me. This is not the life I signed up for. And I don't know how I got myself in this situation, but I want nothing to do with this life anymore. And so within 2 weeks, we were moving out of our apartment. We cleared the apartment out. I went back to my grandparents in New Jersey. He went to go live with his brother and some friends in New Jersey. And it was right at that time I was going back to church with my neighbor who invited me to church in the very beginning. And my neighbor said, I remember we'd been fasting about what I was going to do, and I'd already filed for divorce, and the divorce was happening within a few months. And I remember her saying to me, she said, what's next? Like, where is God? What is God telling you to do next? And without hesitation, I looked at her and I said, I'm moving to Georgia. And she said, do you know anybody in Georgia? I said, no, I do not know a single solitary person in Georgia. And she said, okay. And I hopped on a plane 2 weeks later, flew down to Savannah, had somebody show me apartments, and I moved in 10 days later. And so I went right back to my legalistic church because it's global. So I went right back to my legalistic church where I had, again, clergymen tell me that my value was predominantly in my womb and that no good godly man from church would want a woman who works for herself. And that part of the reason I miscarried is because God was not going to give me babies that I could not be fully present for because I ran a business. And I was furious. I'm like, I just uprooted my whole life. I came back down here. How am I supposed to support myself if I don't have a job? Who's paying my bills? Like, how is that working? And he was like, you'll figure it out. I'm like, yeah, I will figure it out by running my business. How I pay my bills here and eat and tithe and do all those things that you enjoy me doing. I remember being super frustrated. And it was at that time that my grandfather was dying. And so I went back to New Jersey, spent 2 weeks in New Jersey, being there with my grandfather, went back to Georgia after my grandfather passed in July of 2018. And I just needed a break. I was like, I need a break from this church that I'm at. I'm very frustrated. I need a vacation. I just need a break from these people. And so I went to a church down the street, and that is where I met my husband. And he had 2 boys. And we are hoping to have a girl in the future via adoption or surrogacy. But it was so funny when I met my husband at church, and I didn't know he was going to be my husband. He definitely didn't know. We both wanted nothing serious. He had gotten out of a serious relationship. I was divorced earlier in the year. And so I'm like, I am definitely not interested in something serious. And it was my youngest who said to me, you're supposed to be my mom. Like, God told me you're my mom. And I was like, that's crazy. And then my husband and I would get married a few months later. I just knew he was the one. He knew I was the one. And we just celebrated 5 years together a few days ago. And it's so funny how that relationship happened. And when we got together, I went full like homemaker mode. Like all of the things that I've always wanted to do, the promises I feel like I had from God, at this point, 18 years ago, I was like, okay, I get to live those out. My husband was so supportive. This was part of the reason we knew when we got married. We had a very in-depth conversation about what do we want the dynamic to look like? And what are your expectations of me as a wife? And what are your expectations as a husband? And all of those things. Like we mapped all of that out. And so I started learning everything I could about what was going into our bodies and seeing the impact of on the kids and seeing the difference that food made and the products that we used. And I started looking into everything. I started looking at our medicine because I saw over the 3-ish years that I was married, I saw what the pharmaceutical industry could do. Because here I was in that first marriage, doctors telling me that this was safe, drug companies telling me this was safe, and I was in a very unsafe environment. And so I'm like, you're lying to me. These things are not safe. They are not helpful. They are not doing anything for anybody other than creating a cycle of dependence on doctors and pharmaceuticals. And so when my husband and I got married, I'm like, listen, here's where I'm at with the medical industry. And he was like, that's fine. And so I started looking into things and can we go a more holistic route? And so I started making things like fire cider and fermented garlic. And I make our pasta and I make our bread and I make all of these things now. I grow whatever vegetables I can. We get our eggs from my in-laws because they have a farm nearby. And I completely shifted the way that I think and feel about everything. And it is fascinating to watch because, of course, we got married pre the big C. And so then at that point, I'd already made up my mind about pharmaceuticals and the industry as a whole, the food industry. I felt like I'd made a clear decision about those things already. And then the big C happened. And I remember when the HPV vaccine came out and it was experimental and my mom giving me this full round of experimental vaccines and we didn't know what the impact would be. And I mean, it was the same thing with birth control. I was on birth control but just seeing the impacts of that, I knew this wasn't for us. And we all had COVID and we treated it holistically and we were all fine. We have no lingering effects. We have nothing. We've never had to worry about anything. And so the more that I learned, the more removed from the system I became and the more the family has become, which is really cool. I'm thankful that they are on board with all the things that I do and I bring to them, and they are just so insanely supportive. And it's interesting to see because they're just so much healthier. They're so much healthier. We don't have to worry about them getting sick. We don't have to worry about, I just don't worry about those things anymore. And it's really beautiful to see what happens when you remove yourself from a system that you've been told is safe and you go back to the things that you were told are unsafe. Raw milk is a big thing. We do raw milk. Louis Pasteur actually said on his deathbed that it was not a problem with milk. He said the pathogen basically is nothing, aka the listeria that was in the milk. He said terrain is everything, aka the environment in which the milk was produced and the environment of the people consuming it. I say all that to say this is how I came on this journey. And I want to encourage you because I have been there. I was the pro pharma girl. I was the anti-Christian. I was all of those things. And God has transformed me so much and he has shown me so many things. And so I want to encourage you, no matter where you are on this journey, no matter if you're just starting a holistic journey, or maybe you've always been this way, or maybe you're just starting your walk with the Lord, I want to tell you that it's possible. Because if I can do it, then literally anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. And so it's why I'm so passionate about the women that I work with. And so I say that to say, if you're like, all right, Lemon, I am ready to kick off my holistic healing. I want to heal my gut. I want to know what's going into my family's body. And I want to know that what we're putting on our skin is healthy and okay. Then just book a coffee chat with me. Go to lemonprice.co/coffee chat and let's just have a conversation. Let's talk and see if I can help you start this journey. I would love to help you start this journey. I'm excited about what is to come in 2024. You're going to hear more about holistic living, especially as it pertains to your leadership, because that is a big thing. I took the charge on that for my family. It was and I feel like it's our responsibility if we're at home. It's our responsibility to research what is going into our family and what we're feeding our family. And then doing something better about it, doing something different about it. And so I am excited about what 2024 is going to bring. I'm excited for all of the fun things that we have coming up. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening. This has been one of my longer episodes, but I felt like you just needed to know the whole story and to know that if I can do it, you can do it. So until next week, you're going to hear from my friend Tess. She's going to talk about a shame spiral, which is beautiful. It'll fall right into what we're talking about today, because goodness knows I had a lot of shame around the decisions that I made early on before I knew anything different. So thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you next week. Bye, friend. Hey friend, what a joy it has been to share today's journey with you. If you found a spark of inspiration or a nugget of wisdom that resonated, would you bless someone else by sharing this episode with them? It could be the encouragement they need to step into their purpose and calling. Also, if you could spare a moment to leave a review, it would mean the world to me. I really appreciate your feedback, and it really helps our community grow. Remember, the road to discovering God's call for you isn't one you have to walk alone. So join me again next Monday for another episode where we'll continue to explore the depths of leadership and the heights of our heavenly calling. Until then, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting in His plan. God bless you, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye, friend.